GM, everyone.
Good morning. Hey Darren, how you doing?
Yeah, it's pretty good. I think we just invited some of the ABOT people after our acquisition over to Singapore and meeting a lot of new faces today. So I think, yeah, pretty fun Monday for me.
That's awesome, man. We'll just give a few seconds for Francisco to join in. Let me just find him.
Awesome. Yeah, I think this is my first Twitter Spaces. So let me know, if I'm like not muted or, I screw something up.
No, it's all easy. It's just the most annoying things about Twitter Space is you can't actually do it on your computer or your laptop. You have to do it on your phone. It's kind of weird why they don't let you do it on the computer, but it still works fine. Francisco, is that you?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear. Thanks for joining.
All right, cool.
Hey, where are you calling from, Francisco?
I'm actually calling from nearby Barcelona.
Oh, nice. That's exciting.
Yeah.
And Darren, you're in Singapore, right?
Yeah, so it's about 5 p.m. right now. Probably gonna get dinner after this.
And it must be nice and early for you, Francisco.
Yeah. I mean, it's fine. Not that early. It's 11 a.m. So I think it's earlier for you. Maybe I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
No, it's not here. It's 9 p.m.
Okay.
So we cover the world here in this call, which is great. But hey, let's get started. Thanks you, Darren and Francisco, for joining. This is SubQuery Sessions. This is our second ever episode. Today we're going to talk about cross-chain analytics, and it's really exciting. I've got two excellent guest speakers today from different companies, provide different perspectives on this topic. Maybe I should introduce yourself. Maybe let's start with you, Francisco. Do you want to introduce yourself and what does Moonbeam do?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Francisco. I work on the ecosystem development team at Moonbeam. And basically, what we're building on Polkadot is this parachain called Moonbeam, which is an Ethereum compatible parachain on Polkadot. So it helps teams that have already deployed on other EVM compatible layer ones or Ethereum to leverage their code base and to port it seamlessly onto Polkadot via Moonbeam, right? And now we're really focusing beyond EVM compatibility on becoming the best place to deploy natively multi-chain applications. And we'll probably get into that later on in this talk. But in a gist, that's what Moonbeam is.
Yeah, Moonbeam is one of the most exciting places to be on Polkadot at the moment, which is really exciting. You guys have done a great job to get there and get to that position. Darren, you're from Nansen. Take it away.
Yeah, thanks, James. Yeah, so my name is Darren. I joined Nansen in March last year. Right now, I'm sort of heading the smart money team. So I think my job is to think of new smart money segments as well as surface a signal, basically. A quick introduction about Nansen. So we are a blockchain analytics firm. I think we were started in 2020, and initially we were more DeFi focused. I think we're looking at token flows as well as attributing addresses and stuff like that. Although I think we expanded our product offering, and then we are starting to look at NFT analytics as well as even DAO analytics, perhaps. Recently, we just did an acquisition for 8bot, so we are also expanding into being able to show your portfolio as well as things like your trading history and even potentially even your P&L and stuff like that. So I think I'm pretty excited for what's in store as well, and I'll see what I can share here.
Yeah, I'm quite excited because we've got two different teams, and like Francisco and Moonbeam. Moonbeam is trying to build like the core application hub for Polkadot, and doing a really good job at doing that. And Nansen obviously is trying to analyze the success of these hubs, the success of the smart contracts on those hubs. So it's going to be an interesting perspective. So maybe I'll start with you, Francisco. I'm curious to know, how does Moonbeam measure what you're doing so that you can improve, right? You can't improve without measuring. Metrics, everything. How do you guys as a team measure what you're doing to know that you're successful?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And I think analytics, there's a lot of room for analytics to grow in Web3. And that's something that's top of mind for us as well. I think at a high level, we always focus on kind of these general KPIs that everyone analyzes these days. So usage, the amount of smart contracts being deployed, transaction volume, wallets, And then kind of at a high TVL, although TVL is kind of a fickle KPI since there's a component of price involved, and I think it could be a little bit misleading at times. So we're trying to kind of go more granular into the analytics per se. I think DApp specific usage is of importance in our case as well, right? At the end of the day, we're kind of a developer centric platform, and we don't really cater to end users. Our job is to make Moonbeam the best place for developers to build, right? So yeah, I mean, a lot of these things are still in development, and I know for us, analytics is something that is becoming increasingly important, especially like around this area of like cross-chain analytics and cross-chain tooling in general, right? I think our biggest focus heading into this year, and I think probably for the years to come, is catering towards kind of multi-chain applications that maybe their protocols span throughout different parachains on Polkadot, or also different EVM compatible layer ones, right? And particularly on Polkadot right now, there's just a lack of tooling when it comes to XCM, right? Which is this cross-chain messaging product, like instance that allows parachains to communicate. For example, there's no good like cross-chain block explorer. This is something that's pretty primitive right now. And when you're sending tokens from parachain to parachain, users have come to us like, how do I know if my token went through or not? And there's no good way to measure these things. So yeah, I would say those are all high priorities, and also just maybe the most important metric is the amount of developers building, right? What projects are building, what's the quality of those teams, and so yeah, I would say those are kind of the main ones for now.
I'm curious, why did you say, so TVL, you mentioned that it's a bit fickle. Why so, or how so?
Well, I mean, when you strip the TVL metric a bit more in depth, you find that it's not only strictly like retail users using these DeFi protocols. There might be a component where there's VCs kind of providing liquidity. There might be foundations providing liquidity. There's also when price goes up and down, the TVL also gets affected quite a lot. So we're trying to kind of analyze TVL by stripping away those different components, so that you can actually see, okay, how is TVL increasing or decreasing based on like the liquidity itself that's being provided by retail users, and not because of the price fluctuations or kind of VCs coming in and out, right? We're attracted more by broader adoption. So yeah, the team is working on trying to analyze these things, and I just think when you look at the number of TVL alone, it could be like somewhat misleading, but it's still, I would say it's still valid. It's just not a lot of people know about these like technicalities, right?
No, that's fair enough. And so for you, Darren, what, like internally in Nansen, what are you guys most interested in? Obviously, you do a lot of different metrics from a lot of different DeFi protocols. You kind of combine them all together to really try pull out as much insights as possible. What's the difference between a metric and an insight, and how does Nansen really try to focus on the latter?
Right. Yeah, I think that's a pretty interesting question. I would say, so for the company, right, obviously the biggest or most, or we call it North Star metrics revenue, but specifically for, when looking at cross-chain analytics, or even just like analytics on chain, right? I would say the North Star metric that we are looking at is actually labeling coverage or attribution coverage. So if you think about it, every day there are millions of dollars being moved about by funds, degens, retail investors or protocols, etc. But the thing is, we could actually tag and classify every single one of these transactions. It is possible to reach a stage whereby 99% of all transactions on Ethereum, all transactions on BSC, AVAX, etc. We know who is sending it, who is receiving it, what it is for. And so I think that is really the key metric that's driving a lot of our attribution work. So when I say attribution, it covers things like labeling, coming out with like behavioral labels or entity labels, stuff like that. And I would say that's the most important metric they're measuring. And I think it's like some interesting insights, right? Previously, AVAX actually was one of our chain, right, that we had the best coverage on. I think it was about 75%, if I remember correctly. I mean, don't quote me on that, but I think that was the metric that we had, whereby out of all the flows of AVAX and all the tokens on Avalanche, right, 75% of the time, or rather like 75% of the volume, we knew who was sending it. And that is a pretty big indicator in itself, right? Because if you know who is sending it, chances are you look at the size of the transaction, you look at the frequency of transaction, you can tell who is receiving it and what is it for. And so it's a bit of a network effect also. So let's say if we started with 50%, it's a bit hard to hit to 60%. But once we hit 60%, it's a bit harder to go to 70%, so on and so forth. So I think, to answer the question, the most important metric would be out of all this volume daily, how much of it do we know who is sending it, who is receiving it, and what's it for? Yeah.
So that 75% on AVAX is quite interesting. So does that indicate that most of the transaction volume on AVAX is from big whales, or what we call big whales, exchanges and other kind of major known parties? Or does it just mean that you have a exceptional knowledge of the retail accounts on AVAX?
I would say a bit of both. This is all a bit fuzzy to me. So, but I think, a mix of how at a point in time, one of the more popular protocols was Krabada, as well as how maybe some of the whales will be more active on AVAX, stuff like that. So a bit of all these different reasons contributed to us being able to cover approximately 75% of all the volume on AVAX.
Yeah, that's interesting. And Francisco mentioned something around the most important metric for Moonbeam, which isn't that quantifiable. It's somewhat qualifiable, but I'm curious to see how Nansen's approaching this. Are you doing anything around like trying to capture the number of applications developing in ecosystems, the number of different smart contracts that are operating at volume? Is that an insight that you guys are applying a lot of or looking into?
Yeah, I think we're exploring it. So, pretty funny story. The number of, I would say, if you classify NFT collections as sort of projects or protocols, then they have been exploding recently, right? But that's because it's so easy to deploy an NFT, and it's so easy to make it a free mint and get like 100 people just minting your collection. So I think we are looking at trying to, and other than volume, right? Another metric would be the number of addresses that we are able to label, the number of transactions we're able to label. But I think volume is still the most important for now. I think once we have once our foundation and volume is much stronger, right, everything else will fall into place. Because if you know what are the largest volume flows, who is sending it, who is receiving it, then likely it's much easier to determine the protocols and stuff like that. So I think we take a volume approach first, and then I think down the road we're going to look at number of protocols that we actually tagged and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's interesting, and it is always one of those hard things around, going back to the question about metrics versus insights is around how do you capture qualitative insights around things? What threshold do you put on this is a kind of a big NFT project, or this is an NFT project that's kind of organic versus something that's just kind of simulated? I guess your labeling project is going to help with that, because you can kind of keep track of these accounts and make sure they're real people in a way.
Yeah. I guess then I think that would be a nice sort of prompt to say that we're always looking for new ideas for labels and stuff like that. I think one of the ways we can move forward as well is to, in a way, look at an address and we can sort of tell, is this most likely simulated activity? Is this most likely a bot, like someone is cyberlinking this protocol, or is this an actual person or entity behind this address? So with the on-chain data, with things like how many times they've transacted, what contracts they have interacted with, stuff like that, we are able to sort of come to a very soft conclusion.
So Francisco, you talked at the start around one of the biggest challenges, and I completely agree about this, is the cross-chain aspect, right? Cross-chain messages have just become a thing on Polkadot, where two different parachains can send a message to each other, and identifying who sent what message to who on what chain isn't the easiest thing. And I know we're co-sponsoring a big bounty to build a UI for this. How critical do you think solving this challenge will be to the success of Polkadot?
Yeah, I think it's highly important, right? I think the way that the Web3 industry has been evolving has led to kind of this demand, both from a developer perspective and a user perspective, for cross-chain interactions. Obviously, Polkadot has been natively built for these cross-chain communications. But even beyond Polkadot, you kind of see this as a thing throughout Web3 in general, right? Like Avalanche with their subnets. I think Binance Smart Chain announced a couple months ago that they were going to be building side chains. So I think it's difficult to argue that we're not already in like a permanently multi-chain environment, and different L1s are starting to adapt to that. the thing is that the tooling is not entirely there yet, right? Which is fine. I think that's a normal thing at this point in the game. But yeah, I think the design space within this area is going to grow dramatically in the next 12 to 18 months because of where the industry is heading, right? Polkadot itself has been, it's been building this for around 5 to 6 years. So I think it's in a good position when it comes to cross-chain interactions. And so yeah, I do think it's going to be very important. Especially for Moonbeam itself. I mean, we're focusing a lot to work with protocols that are attempting to tackle these issues. And then the fact that you're kind of exploring this new area obviously leads to like new problems that weren't even thought of before. So it leads to a bunch of new obstacles, but I think that we're moving in the right direction. So yeah, right now we're just, as said, working with both inward facing cross-chain integrations within the Polkadot ecosystem itself. So we created kind of a new token standard called XC20s, which allows for substrate native assets to be represented as an ERC20 within Moonbeam's EVM. And I think that's relevant because many parachains within Polkadot don't necessarily specialize in DeFi and things of this sort. So they want to have their token traded or loaned or have usage for them within the DeFi ecosystem. So I think Moonbeam will become an important activity hub for these cross-chain tokens. And beyond kind of these cross-chain asset transfers, I think that's step one. We're looking at more kind of complex use cases where you might call a smart contract remotely from parachain to parachain. A good use case, a good example of that is like Lido, for example, where they carry out their liquid staking operations on the relay chain of Kusama and Polkadot, but their dApp actually lives on Moonriver and Moonbeam, right? So on the front end, the user is kind of using MetaMask to stake their daughter KSM on Moonbeam and Moonriver, but on the back end, Lido is kind of calling or invoking functions on a chain that's completely remote to Moonbeam and Moonriver. And I think this is where we kind of see this area called what we call like natively multi-chain, where on the back end, a dApp might be leveraging several specialized functions of different chains. And on the front end, the user will be stripped away of that complexity. Those are all lessons I think that we can take from Web 2, where I think right now in general in Web 3, the user is way too exposed to a lot of like the infrastructural side of things. They need to know too many things. And as things progress, I think a lot of that complexity will be removed for the end user. So yeah, I mean, all these different things will inevitably lead to a very high demand for these like cross-chain tools, cross-chain applications, and yeah, we're trying to be on the front lines to be one of those best places for those types of interactions.
It's a really fascinating use case, right? Where, as you say, a natively multi-chain application, where you kind of interact with it on one chain and it results in output in the other one. That isn't just like a bridge, and I assume this also extends not just with the parachain pairings or the pairings, but also with other layer ones outside of Moonbeam and other ecosystems, right? You are looking at building as tight integrations of those other layer ones as possible.
Yeah, exactly. So what I mentioned is kind of like inwardly facing into Polkadot, which is made possible through XCM. But that doesn't kind of change the reality that many of the projects building on Moonbeam also have deployments on external facing L1s, right? Like Avalanche or like Phantom, Binance Smart Chain, Ethereum. So we're trying to collaborate with as many protocols, kind of tackling the interoperability problems just with separated blockchains, right? Most of them are kind of approaching it in a general message passing way. And we're starting to see more and more teams tackling this issue, right? Where, for example, you might have like an instance of your protocol deployed on like several EVM compatible chains, but this is kind of what we've seen recently, right? Where projects want to expand onto new chains, they want access to new assets, to new users, they want to grow their community, so they just kind of copy paste their protocol into separate L1s. The problem is that liquidity becomes difficult to leverage on separate chains, right? You have to kind of bridge them, then it gets fragmented, it's confusing for the end user. Leveraging governance is also not easy. So being able to, do you include all of the instances of your protocol in the same governance referenda? Or do you kind of isolate it? And does that alienate your community as a consequence? So the fact that it's been going multi-chain doesn't still kind of came with issues, right? So we see projects kind of attempting to solve these things, acting kind of as an orchestration layer of sorts, or some sort of like intelligence layer where, I don't know, for example, if I'm Francisco and I have liquidity on chain A, but I want to take out a loan on chain B using the same protocol. Now we're seeing projects that might tackle the issue. Okay, like we recognize that Francisco has liquidity on chain A. Let's let him take out a loan on chain B without having to actually bridge over that liquidity in order to do so, right? Which then kind of solves the bridging and liquidity fragmentation issue. Then, of course, it leads to a whole myriad of other issues around trust assumptions and how these things get disputed. But yeah, this is kind of where we see things heading, and I think we're going to see a lot more in this design space in the time to come.
It's tricky, right? Like at the moment, we're kind of got these blockchains that act like little islands, and you kind of have some bridges between these islands that have a single lane and a toll booth, and it's a bit hard to get across. But all these different islands, and really for the future, and what we all kind of aim to do in Polkadot is to bridge, or not bridge these islands, but kind of connect them a bit more natively, and that's a huge challenge, as you've said, with the tooling requirements involved. And the analytics involved, data requirements involved. But from a data analytics point of view and for a data point of view, this is the opportunity for teams like us at SubQuery, and also you, Darren, at Nansen. There's a huge opportunity that awaits those that are able to pass, understand, learn, and present all this disparate sources of data from different chains in different ways in a very consistent interface. And so how does Nansen kind of deal with cross-chain stuff at the moment? Are you doing much work around labeling wallets across chains, or have you started thinking about this in seriousness?
Yeah, so I mean, firstly about labeling wallets cross-chain, right? I think we have started putting in some engineering resources into that. I think one of our more notable recent findings was we launched a UST report, right? And that was only, how do I put it? We were able to find out, certain wallets that sort of started, I wouldn't say started the bank run, but, they're part of the bank run, and then they left Anchor pretty early on, and they breached out of Terra, back to the mainnet or any other chain. And then I think that's where our internal tooling for being able to see this flows cross-chain, this labeling was helpful, because let's say if we knew an address, we knew who an address belonged to on Ethereum, but we didn't know who it belonged to on Terra. So, but when they breached it back to Ethereum, right, then it was pretty obvious to see. So I think that's one thing that we're working on cross-chain. But I would say like something that we have been sort of, I wouldn't say struggling with, but something that there is a problem that we are facing when working on cross-chain stuff is the behavior of wallets are sort of different. So I mean, let's use an example, right? So for smart money, I think an immediate question is that if an address is considered smart on Ethereum, should it be considered smart on all other chains that it belongs to? Because if you think about it, it's probably smart because it has an edge. Maybe it's part of a Discord group, part of a NFT collection, etc., and it has an edge on Ethereum. But if it moves to another chain, let's say like on Moonbeam or AVEX or whatever, it might not have the same edge. So then should it still be smart? And another example would be, let's say looking at Arbitrum, they just launched their NFT collections, right? But the volume on Arbitrum NFTs, right, is pretty small. I mean, at least relative to Ethereum. So how do we surface these smart traders on Arbitrum? Do we lower our profit levels? Do we make it a bit more relaxed, or do we compromise, or do we still use the same standards? So I think cross-chain behaviors are different, metrics are very different. So can we use the same heuristic to apply for both Ethereum and another chain? So I think that's something that we've been thinking a lot about recently.
Yeah, and I guess as you get better with your classification heuristics, and I assume you're using some kind of machine learning in that picture there, I would imagine you could do some work in terms of trying to identify a individual that has different wallets on different chains and trying to link those wallets together or with some probability to kind of ease this problem.
Yeah. I think the good thing is everything is on chain, right? Like you mentioned. But I think there was a good point brought up previously, which is how right now there isn't even a good explorer that allows you to see different chains, like an address, and it's activating on different chains all at once. You have to have like 6-7 tabs, and then you have to look at internal transactions, tracers, stuff like that, and even the transaction hash, right? To try and understand what's happening. So I think I do agree that some sort of multi-chain explorer be able to see the bridging, the swaps and everything on different chains all at once. That will go a long way to helping us understand how different wallets on different chains might actually be all connected.
So, Darren, I'm curious to know, obviously the market's had a bit of a downturn recently in the last few months. What have you seen in the data itself around this downturn? Like, I always notice that there's differences between developers doing stuff and developing away and the kind of the retail hype. What about the DeFi data? What have you seen over the last couple of months?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to talk about NFTs, but yeah, I think related to the DeFi data, probably 2 to 3, key insights. One is looking at smart money. A lot of people are stabling up. So I think, it's partially because of the whole macro situation as well as the recent crash of a particular chain. But I think, all of these reasons spook people. So I think a lot of people are moving. We see a bit of a flight to safety to USDC, USDT, etc. So I think that's one big bullet point, right? I think that the second point actually is, I would say, because gas fees are a lot lower. So I wouldn't say there is a spike in like protocol usage, but it hasn't really fallen off that much from what we are seeing. So in terms of like trading, I mean, trading is a bit less, but let's say protocol usage or bridging from Ethereum to another chain to a cheaper chain, etc. There is still this people doing this, and I think that's partially because gas is a lot cheaper than it was before, just a few months ago. Like previously, if I had to bridge from chain A to B, probably cost me close to $100, right? But now I think it's single digits or low double digits, so it's a lot more affordable. And I think this is a good time actually for people to play around with the various protocols. Hopefully, of course, with the potential of an airdrop, right? So you have to do some research here and there. Yeah.
So you think it's people playing around?
Yeah, I'm playing around. I think I looked at X-Pollinate. And I'm not sure if you guys seen it before, but they are trying to do cross-chain swaps, with just like one click, something like that. So I think that's pretty interesting to look at.
Okay, that's interesting. Well, it's great to see that when gas fees do go down, people are more open to trying new things, which is quite good in our industry. That there's so many cool products out there, so many great ways to do amazing things that a lot of people haven't tried out. So it's great to see that as gas fees have decreased, people are more willing and able to try new things, and I guess that indicates that the future maybe looks bright for those chains that do pride themselves in having lower gas fees.
Yeah.
What about you, Francisco? What have you seen anecdotally from in terms of the developers in your ecosystem? You've been talking to them, I assume. Are they still mad keen building, or are people kind of a little bit more cautious these days?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think for me personally, it's been the answer has been a bit counterintuitive. I think during a bear market, you might expect activity to go down, and people might be a little bit more scared, and that may be true from like a user perspective. But at least from what we're seeing, we're still seeing like a very high activity of developers building on Moonbeam. A lot of teams are still engaged; they're continuing to build. I think the best teams understand that the bear market could actually turn out to be a good thing in the long term for the space as a whole. A lot of the weaker teams or scammy teams, things like this, they get kind of washed out. We are seeing, at least the Moonbeam Foundation is seeing, an uptick in grant applications, and that might be an indication that teams are kind of looking for help in terms of subsidizing their applications. But at the same time, we still see like a lot of engagement, and there's a bunch of developers still building. So I would say I'm quite optimistic for what's to come, since I haven't seen at all like kind of panicking with a lot of the teams building on Polkadot. So yeah, I don't think the bear market has affected like the enthusiasm of developers in terms of building on Moonbeam at all.
Yeah, and Darren, what about Nansen? Obviously, you guys aren't on Polkadot yet. Does that mean one day you might come? And you don't have to answer this question. We can hope.
They're definitely open to it. Happy to connect with Francisca after this if you haven't spoke to our team yet.
Well, Francisco, I'd love to hear from your point of view. What is like one bit of advice that you would give a team like Nansen, who are pretty big in other ecosystems, have a lot of experience around the place, and it might be entering Polkadot for the first time. What's different? What's similar? What's the most important thing to know about Polkadot?
Yeah, I mean, I think Polkadot is maybe from the outside it seemed as very complex, and not a lot is known about it. And to be fair, it can like seem complex, and it probably is, but there's always like kind of a rationale behind the complexity that ends up working for the best. I mean, I would recommend, I think it can be a bit daunting to try to build your own parachain or have to learn Substrate or Rust in order to do so. So I think that's where Moonbeam has been able to get a lot of traction, right? It kind of, it acts as like the easiest on-ramp possible for a lot of these teams that want to get exposure to the Polkadot ecosystem. So, I mean, if you're looking to get into it, you can use Moonbeam, right? By taking the knowledge that you already have with Solidity or kind of the Ethereum space in terms of tooling and all these things. And you can leverage all those things to get access to the Polkadot ecosystem. A lot of the work that we've been doing is kind of merging the adoption of the Ethereum world with kind of the power of Polkadot, right? So, for example, a lot of what we've been doing is like building these pre-compiled contracts that like allow for developers to use Ethereum tools like MetaMask or Solidity to access like Polkadot native functionality, such as staking or governance or XCM, which is what we mentioned before, this cross-chain messaging format. So it makes it really interesting, right? Because you no longer have to kind of delve into Substrate and Rust to use these things, but you can kind of use a lot of the pre-compiles that we've created for you to do so. So I would encourage any team that's interested in kind of having access to Polkadot, you can reach out to me or the rest of the team. There's various areas of support where we can help builders. So yeah, I would encourage to give it a try. And then if you see a valid use case after having built on Moonbeam, teams always have the chance to kind of to make a parachain themselves, right? So you don't necessarily have to directly jump in and have to kind of finance a parachain and build one yourself. But if you like the experience after having worked on Moonbeam, you can go and do that, right? And we would consider it a great success if we're able to on-ramp more and more teams into becoming parachains.
Now we have someone's requested to speak. I guess it's questions time. Is that okay for you guys?
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Nacho, you can now speak. And if anyone else wants to ask a question, just request to speak. Nacho, you might want to unmute your mic.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I'm a member of the community of Proof of Humanity, and you guys were talking about recently about person being able to interact with I think it was the votes, right? Or I don't recall now. But in Proof of Humanity, I don't know if you guys know it, but this is a civil protocol that allow you to put your identity on the blockchain, on the Ethereum blockchain. You upload your picture, a video of you saying, I certify I'm a real human, and I have already registered this registry with your address in a paper or in a screen. And you upload that to the blockchain, and you start, when you get registered in this registry, you start receiving a UBI token. So I was thinking maybe we're going to make a partnership, and you can leverage this protocol so you know for sure that you are interacting with the person and not with the bot.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting proof of humanity projects out there, decentralized identity, which would be quite a good kind of opportunity for Nansen to kind of identify who's a real person versus, like that labeling aspect. Yeah, I don't know, you got any thoughts on that, Darren?
Yeah. I think I've seen Proof of Humanity, specifically this protocol before. So they need, let's say, if I want to prove that I'm a human and not a bot, what I need to do actually is to upload a picture of myself holding a piece of paper with my address to the to make it publicly available, I think. I think that is one like pretty interesting concept. I guess the sort of downside is that it isn't like, I mean, firstly, some people have some privacy concerns, and secondly, it is theoretically possible to I mean we have like scholarships, right, for gaming DAOs. So why not scholarships for proof of humanity? There is like, it is possible to still like hire 1,000 people, have them take a photo and stuff like that. But I do think it is a pretty interesting concept, and yeah, I'll be eager to dive further offline.
Do you think that for blockchain to go mainstream and to be adopted by mainstream authorities, companies, we will have to have more identity on chain and more proof of identity with your account and address?
I mean, personally, for me, I wouldn't say it must for us to go mainstream, because if you guys on like Instagram or Facebook, etc., I'm sure you see a lot of accounts that aren't like public, stuff like that. So I don't think there is a need to go 100% public. I need my face, my age, my name, my full name and stuff all on online, publicly available. Although I think we'll move towards I would say a scenario, right, or an environment whereby people need to find, how to put it, people need on-chain credentials. Maybe for example, I mean, just a random thought, right, would be, what if there is a score, right, that tells you whether this person dumped an airdrop immediately or not. So I think this would be interesting for like protocols if they're doing future airdrops, stuff like that. So I do think like there might be a move towards on-chain credentials and reputation.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, right? There's nothing more self-destructive to a protocol, or to a NFT, or to a collection, or some sort of thing, if the founders of the core team start dumping it. So I've always said, one thing that you can never, it's the hardest thing to earn, but you can lose it so quickly, is reputation in crypto, and that's one of the main things you have to preserve and work hard to do such a thing.
Yeah, and the thing about that about being you publicly exposed, like anyone can like go to your profile and see, okay, this is the person I'm interacting with. So now it's been also in develop a protocol that's called Sysmo.io. This protocol adds a layer of privacy. So, for example, you have your profile registered on this proof of humanity, but you can leverage this other protocol, Sysmo.io, that gives you a layer of privacy, but that person what you're interacting is a human, although you can't see the identity. That's very cool.
And Francisco, Moonbeam obviously has an on-chain identity payload. What's your thoughts on how important that is for people going to the treasuries, people trying to participate in governance? How important do you think it is that people need to have an identity to make sure that they're real, or a bot?
Yeah. I mean, this is another area where eventually it'll be needed, right? Particularly, I think within DeFi, as like regulation starts to become more important, I think protocols will have to make a decision. I mean, there's a large spectrum of kind of decentralization, right? And I think there'll come a point where a lot of these protocols that are kind of in between will have to make a decision. And many of them will be using a lot of these like privacy and on-chain identity tools. We have been speaking to several teams that are like tackling this issue. I think it's interesting for ones that are kind of creating this identity, these properties of your identity into kind of an NFT, like an ERC 721, where it's not necessarily revealed like all of your personal attributes. It's just kind of the protocol will know whether you're accepted or not, which I think is interesting. But yeah, I mean, I think it'll become more kind of binary, in my opinion. Whereas now there's protocols that are more distributed along that like privacy and identity spectrum. But I do think it'll become important for sure. So there's several teams that are already building these types of solutions on Moonbeam. It's still too early to say which ones will be the most successful. I imagine for them, it's also a challenge for them to build these things out right now. Timing is a big component of it, right? So I think as regulation starts to tighten up, there'll be more of a demand from the protocols themselves to incorporate these solutions. at which point, like, all the teams building these things will probably see more kind of product market fit. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it develops in the next years.
Hey, Darren, Francisco, thank you very much for your time. I think we're running out of time. But it was a pleasure having you today on the second episode of SubQuery Sessions. We'll be running these every fortnight. I think this week or later this week, I'll be at Consensus. Will you be at Consensus, Francisco? I assume Moonbeam will be there, and so will Nansen.
Yeah, no, personally, I won't be there, but I know several of our like team members are going to be there. So yeah, if you're going to be there, Darren or James, like, would be happy to connect with someone from our team.
Yeah, and everyone else there, keep an eye out for us on the floor. I'm sure there'll be thousands of people, so it'll be pretty hard to spot us. But it was a pleasure. And Francisco, anything else you want to say before Darren? Anything you want to say or share? How can we contact you or follow you after?
Yeah, just want to say, thanks for organizing this. I thought it was really well organized and really enjoying the discussion on cross-chain analytics. I'm looking forward to the SubQuery public sphere as well. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having us. It was a pleasure as always, and thanks to the community. If you want to reach out, you can contact either Moonbeam or myself via Telegram. My handle is the same as on Twitter. So yeah, if you have an idea or you want to build something, feel free to reach out. The foundation also has a grants program which you can apply to, and so we can kind of discuss how to best support your team.
Excellent. Yeah, no, I'm also looking for the public sale, Darren, but it's a huge amount of work. It's busy time, but that's life in crypto, I guess. Never sleep, unfortunately. But hey, thanks everyone, and enjoy the rest of your morning, day, afternoon, evening, good night, wherever you are. Cheers.
All right, thanks everyone. Bye.
Cheers. See you.